For a lot of us that play D&D, I don't think anything really stops the sheer joy of like chucking actual dice across a table while your mate judges your rolling technique like it's a new Olympic sport. Sadly, once adulthood rolls initiative, jobs, kids, partners who expect, quality time, that weekly game night, it kind of just vanishes, right? Faster than anyone taking accountability for Game of Thrones Season 8. And then you enter virtual tabletops and co-op RPGs, and they're here to kind of like save the day. Like a tipsy Gandalf turning up precisely when he means to, but still getting the job done. That's basically the vibe of Demeo Dungeons and Dragons Battlemarked. It kind of drops you into a digital tabletop where you can just basically faff about with customizable minis. You can run full campaigns. You can even bash out one-shots when you're feeling nostalgic. I guess to remind you of the days when you had free time. It's great for all of these reasons. It fixes a lot of like the usual headaches. You've got cross-platform play. And this kind of means you can have mates on. Obviously, we all know what cross-platform means, Christ. I'm not going to go into that. But I guess because they kind of insist it's just better for productivity. But what it absolutely cannot fix is the eternal struggle to align the calendars of grown adults with full-time jobs and a partner that wants quality time. Even magic missiles can't target that. I found this game pretty cool, right? It basically offers you 2 full campaigns, 4 unlockable one-shots, plenty to kind of keep you busy while you're like whether you're friendless like me and playing solo or wrangling a party of up to 4 friends who still pretend that they're going to be on in 5 minutes. Like I said, crossplay, co-op is in there, plus like an in-game voice chat so that you can recreate the classic D&D vibe of arguing about rules and making terrible jokes and occasionally remembering to fight some monsters. So should we talk about it? Like Demeo kind of started off as a VR dungeon crawler that nailed the job, or basically of sitting around a fantasy board game and not just the role-playing bit. Think like less, I deliver a stirring monologue to the king, and more, I'm going to bop this goblin on the head and then loot whatever falls out. It's spiritually closer to games like Descent, Journeys in the Dark than your classic tabletop D&D. Now, Battlemarked, it leans right into that lineage. It builds itself as a tactical, cooperative, digital kind of like board game set in the Forgotten Realms, and honestly, it's kind of exactly what it is. You and up to, like I said, 3 mates are going to plonk yourself on this and your little digital minis onto a virtual table full of monsters and traps and treasure chests. Then you move on to an enemy, then you smack it. It's basically adventuring etiquette. Battlemark then keeps the same digital board game rhythm, attack cards, ability cards, very like deterministic results, kind of assuming that the dice feel like cooperating, obviously. And because this one's kind of wearing its D&D cosplay proudly, you're going to see a D20 though, but instead of numbers, it's basically covered in like hit symbols, like +1 crit success, crit fail, those kind of things. Oops! I stabbed my friend. There's definitely a room on the dice for that, but it is streamlined. It's a lot of fun and it works. If you're forever the DM at your table, that noble soul condemned to spend your evenings crafting elaborate plot hooks that your party is just going to heroically ignore in favour of chatting out the barmaid, then you'll know the quiet longing of kind of wanting to just be a player for once and have everything done for you, to turn up, to plonk down a character and kind of cause problems on purpose without worrying about encounter balance or who forgot their dice again. Dave. That's where Battlemarked earns its keep. You get these fully licensed D&D adventures marinated in familiar lore. You've got proper like Forgotten Realms stuff, not the like I made this up on the bus variety. And you don't have to lift a finger. The game's narrator steps in as the DM, and this kind of removes the need for prep and improv, all that spreadsheet where you calculate how many goblins is too many. Now everyone just basically grabs a character and jumps in. No rulebook, no arguments about canon, and basically absolutely no chance of someone doing a terrible Gollum voice unless they really insist, and I won't say no. So like I said, Battlemarked is fully voice acted. Now this means you get a DM narrator who actually sounds like they've had coffee, plus voice player characters and NPCs who bring like far more enthusiasm to the table. Oh god, that was my voice is sounding like a crow. Far more. What was I talking about? Anyway, the NPCs are enthusiastic, right? I was about to roast Dave again and say they're more enthusiastic than him because he always shows up like he's auditioning for the world's dullest Star Trek extra. The whole thing ends up feeling like pleasantly immersive, like playing at a table where everyone else is genuinely up for a bit of role play rather than pretending they just rolled low on charisma. The characters really kind of like come alive too. From NPCs, like I said, big attitudes to the playable classes themselves. Some of the voice lines you get with spells, crits and spectacular fumbles, they are an absolute delight, really. If we look at customization wise as well, Battlemarked, it gives you this really neat kind of like little menu of familiar pre-built classes at launch. So you've got all your classics, the ranger, the paladin, the rogue, the wizard, the bard, the fighter, all customizable minis, because of course that's kind of what truly matters to any self-respecting tabletop nerd. You can't build like a full character from scratch like you would in, for example, like Baldur's Gate 3, kind of messing around with sliders for like 3 hours. But you do get some really meaningful choices when creating and leveling up your hero. It's just enough to scratch that TTRPG itch without delaying the evening while someone debates eyebrow colour for 90 minutes. Now, your deck of cards depends kind of entirely on who you're playing. And Battlemarked, it will give you like a proper buffet of classic D&D archetypes to choose from. Kind of like someone emptied out the monster manual and said, right then, who wants what? I'm going to mention Bolthrax, the Bright Scale. Now, this is the Dragonborn Paladin. It's kind of like your classic frontline tank. Big, shiny, loud, and built to soak up the damage like he's auditioning to be like a Warhammer Space Marine who got lost on the way to the Crusade. Behind him, you've got Ash, the Tiefling Rogue, creeping about like and stabbing things with all of the enthusiasm of like Gollum spotting an unintended ring. Now then you've got Jessix, the Human Ranger, kind of hangs back, making targets, firing arrows like she's on loan from Legolas's B team. And then there's Tibby, the halfling sorcerer, gleefully kind of like hurling ice and fire around with the chaotic energy of someone who definitely shouldn't have access to that much magic. They're fun, right? Then there are 2 more characters in the full game, each with their own core abilities available like most turns, plus like a grab bag of randomized classes, powers that unlock as you go. Tibby might snag a glorious like fireball, while Ash could like nab a teleport and like stab move that drops her straight back into the stealth like a budget nightcrawler. It is really satisfying, but it's cool because there is a solid mix of classes here, and they actually complement each other rather nicely, like a slightly dysfunctional fellowship where everyone pretends they planned their synergies instead of just panic picking whatever sounded cool at the time. The gameplay itself, I think it's wonderfully straightforward. You creep through the dungeon, fog of war peeling back as you go, like boot open doors like you're kind of like reenacting a low budget Lord of the Rings spin-off, and immediately discover an entire ecosystem of things that would very much like to ruin your day. Goblins, fungal weirdos, rogue archers, spellflingers, and of course, rats. Absolute oceans of rats, like someone kind of turned Vermintide up to 11. Now, as you play through the Battlemarked campaign, your character levels up, and that progression affects both your in-game power and your cosmetics. Now, new dice colours, little trinkets, extra flair for your mini, they start to trickle in, kind of just enough to make your pre-built model feel like your pre-built model. It's the digital equivalent of lovingly painting your miniature, except without the part where you end up with Nuln Oil all over your hands and your kitchen table. The brutality like really kicks in when the dice start bouncing around on this 3D board, clattering across the scenery before like delivering their verdict like a particularly judgmental polyhedral oracle. You'll see all the familiar highs and lows of the tabletop look, the kind of rolls that either make you kind of want to build a shrine to your dice or chuck them in to Mount Doom. Now, with randomized levels, one might chuck you head first into a pack of trolls roughly the size of small bungalows, while the next one is going to greet you with more like manageable sets of foes. It keeps you on your toes. It's that classic D&D. Like, I definitely did not sign up for this encounter, but I'm bloody down for it anyway. It's that kind of sort of energy. Now, what I like is that Battlemarked really starts layering on the D&D charm kind of the moment you step outside of the pure dungeon crawling core. There's noticeably more story wrapped around the action. The whole thing plays out on this lovely little woodland battleground. I can get my words out. With a stream and a bridge, naturally, because no self-respecting fantasy encounter is complete without somewhere dramatic to stand while monologuing. It is a tight tidy, bite-sized scrap that kind of sets up the broader campaign, which quickly shuffles you off to kind of escort the noble and his fashionably late companion back to a tavern in Neverwinter. Very traditional, very D&D, very yes. I've definitely seen this opening in a dozen modules, but I'm still here for it. Mechanically, it is still pure Demeo, aside from the odd skill check, but the world, that's where the kind of D&D flavour is going to hit you like a hi. It's going to hit you like a rogue rolling max damage. That is hard to say. It was in my head and I couldn't spit it out. Anyway, before I go full Tolkien on a tea break and start lecturing about Neverwinter bureaucracy or the well-documented SAS levels of elves, we're going to pause because, I'm and we're going to be here forever. We're going to admire, I can't talk today, admire the environments that the devs have cooked up. They genuinely look like someone grabbed the best bits of 5e artwork and then shoved them into a 3D renderer and declared, make this look like the kind of terrain a DM is going to unveil with a smug grin while everyone gasps and pretends that they didn't just knock over 3 minis. Now the second set piece, now this is like a sprawling treetop tavern. It absolutely nails that energy. You've got miniatures are scattered everywhere in this really cool diorama style scenes, giving the whole place the vibe of stumbling into the middle of a particularly rowdy night out. It's kind of like the Prancing Pony got a Warhammer terrain upgrade. You half expect a tipsy elf to kind of fall off the balcony and then blame the dice. It's a really nice vibe. What I like about this though is that it lets you zoom in so far that you're basically looming over the minis like some sort of mildly confused kaiju. Suddenly your little adventurers are like Barbie sized and the detail somehow still holds up. You can even spot who's on the wine, who's on the mead, and who's clearly making some questionable choices. Now the whole aesthetic has this perfect Saturday afternoon painting Warhammer, but with fewer regrets and financial decisions. Away from the monster bashing, there's a surprisingly chunky amount of story. Dialogue plays out using miniature characters, fully voiced, captions floating over their little heads like speech bubbles from a graphic novel that your uncle insists is high art. Each player gets their own version of the conversation so that you can really click through at your own pace. I think Battlemarked is kind of basically a digital table pretending to be the sort of handcrafted masterpiece only a legendary DM or someone who's mortgaged their house for craft supplies could produce. Now every level looks like terrain pulled straight from, like I said, your average tabletop collector's dream. Gloriously painted, ridiculously detailed, and absolutely nothing like the cardboard and Sharpie setups the rest of us have been using since 1998. And because the devs know what they're doing, you can still see the room the table sits in, which somehow captures the exact vibe of sitting down for an in-person session, minus the snacks and the one friend who always arrives late with an unfinished character sheet, Dave. Now, once you drop into a map, the whole thing turns into this little 3D stage play. Your mini, their minis, random NPCs who definitely want something from you. It's all there, rendered like the world's nerdiest stop motion film. And then there are the dice. Now, these things are absurdly huge, like someone fed a normal D20 after midnight. Now, attacks and checks rely on these chunky lads essentially tumbling around the board, bonking off scenery. Yeah. And generally behaving as if they're auditioning for a pinball machine. Rolling them is stupidly fun. I mean, I cackled like a gremlin when I accidentally launched one off a bridge, but only for it to kind of still register as a crit. Now, the game always knows what face it lands on, even when the die has vanished into some pocket dimension, which is more than I can say for half my real dice. Last seen rolling under the sofa somewhere. Now, it is worth noting, like I did briefly mention it at the beginning, that the dice are equally bespoke. Instead of using the usual D20 giving you a spectrum from heroic triumph to utter embarrassment, Demeo's attack dice, they use icons for hit, crit, or catastrophic faceplant. Because of the way they're weighted, you'll see the crits and fumbles far more often than you would in a normal D&D session. So I essentially just prepare for chaos. At first, it is a little bit weird to get used to, especially if you're kind of used to the standard math where rolling a nat 1 is a rare cosmic insult, but honestly it kind of does make combat feel a little bit livelier. Every toss of the die it is suddenly a high stakes moment, like watching a lightsaber duel performed by paladins who definitely skipped their Safety briefing. Now, playing Battlemarked feels a bit like someone took D&D, ran it through a Demeo-shaped filter and then said, yeah, that'll do. You've got the lore, the monsters, the familiar classes, but the moment-to-moment gameplay, it follows Demeo's card-driven turn economy, I suppose, rather than your usual D&D, like, I can attempt literally anything approach. Now, once your brain kind of adjusts to that, it does become refreshingly brisk. Your options are right there on the cards. So turns don't really devolve into 20-minute analysis paralysis or like heated debates about who's going to stand where and how many meters and you know how it goes, right? So after spending the frankly, I guess, embarrassing number of hours lobbing giant novelty dice around a virtual table and shouting like, why are there more rats again? I can safely say that Battlemarked absolutely does capture the spirit of D&D, specifically the part where everything goes wrong in increasingly funny ways. And yet everyone kind of insists they're having a perfectly normal planned session. Does it replace the in-person feeling of D&D? Obviously not. Nothing can truly recreate the majesty of gathering around a real table with real snacks and real arguments and about kind of like whether flanking should give advantage. But Battlemarked does come surprisingly close. Kind of close enough that you'll look at your calendar, realise your next in-person game isn't until 2047, and then think, yeah, all right, let's whack on the headset instead. It's fast. It's a little bit silly. It's dramatic. It kind of lets you punt dice off bridges. It provides the exact amount of chaos you expect when someone tries to mix D&D with VR and a dash of like, what if minis were huge? The voice acting is charming. The environments are lush enough to kind of make my battered old battle maps just sob quietly over there in the corner. And it kind of, the combat kind of has the right amount of like, this was absolutely not the plan, but it's fun anyway. Now, if you want something that kind of feels like D&D but requires roughly 97% less preparation, fewer spreadsheets, and zero emotional damage from your party, ignoring every blood, sweat, and tears hour you put into the prep, then this is the game for you. It makes you think like, yeah, maybe one more dungeon. What's the worst that could happen? Trolls. Trolls are going to happen. It's always trolls, probably rats too. Anyway, I'm only going to implore you one time to please do all those things you need to do to support my channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.